Hi guys, it's Ryan Henderhan here from Make Tennis Great Again, and I'm here with Bill Patton. He's a master professional, contributor to sportsedtv.com, author of visual training for tennis, which is now a course that we're going to talk about. So, Bill,
Hey there, how are you doing?
thanks for coming on. Let's tell us more about your visual training program.
Okay, well, it's actually Poita Smith is coming on right now. Okay, so I'm going to be managing getting people in here at the same time. So if I
Yeah.
get a little distracted, that's okay. But yeah, the program has started from this book, Visual Training for Tennis, which I wrote in 2017. And that was the product of 28 years of coaching and thinking that I knew things about vision and that I knew enough to put it into a book. Um, and then, just to be conscientious, I made sure that I did some research. So I spent a couple of months scouring the internet and talking to as many people as I could who I knew were interested in this field of sports vision and especially, how to see the tennis ball better. So I put my
What
two
did you
or
find?
well, what I found was about 100% more information than what I already knew. So that to me was shocking. And so that I want to share something right now. I'm going to do a little screen share right here. So
Yeah.
this is what I ended up with. I ended up with cognitive dissonance. So this is why people get upset when their beliefs are challenged because it's a mental conflict when you realize, "Oh, wait, I thought I knew some stuff, and then it turns out I didn't know as much. I didn't know as much as I thought I knew." But I mean, at the same time, I mean, it was a bit of a headache, but it was also refreshing to
Yeah.
now have new information to work with. Um, One of the key pieces that came out of that was a deeper exploration of how does your dominant eye work and how does it work in conjunction with your laterality. So that's where the pure dextral and the cross dextral stuff came from. And the research from that is actually from golf. So I took a research piece for golf and people putting, um, and extrapolated it to tennis, tried it out, not knowing if it would work or not. And lo and behold, it did. It worked really well. And some people had these epiphanies. Um, so I had a lady, I was in Atlanta to do a special clinic for visual training. And 5 minutes before the clinic, she comes up to me and she says, "I have no depth perception." And I'm thinking, okay, how am I going to solve this in 5 minutes? And, do I actually have anything for her? I don't know. But it turns out that teaching her the skills that will go with pure dextral players was exactly what she needed. And she went away extremely happy, like I'd solved a lifelong problem for her. So so that's the part that's really exciting, is that I do believe pure dextral players haven't been taught very well. And so anybody watching this, you have an opportunity to reach more players and be more successful with more
Could,
players.
could you explain what cross dextral and pure dextral is?
Yes, in a nutshell, it's when a pure dextral person is right eye dominant and right handed, or left eye dominant and left handed, and cross is opposite. So it's left eye dominant and right handed, right eye dominant and left handed. And my experience of doing this for, now more than 3 years has been that about 50% of the population is one or the other. I couldn't tell you which one is the slight majority, but it's approximately 50-50 from what I'm seeing. Uh, but yeah, the most common, I think, is that the largest minority out of all those people are cross-dextral right-handers.
Okay, so it's the opposite for left-handers to even it out a bit.
Yes, and so it's not, yeah, there's not an exact breakdown. But now, you know, the topic for today's webinar, though, is to kind of go one step earlier and break down into the dominant eye and really get into how to use your dominant eye.
Okay.
So
So just a quick question. Golf is watching a ball stationary, where tennis is watching a moving ball. Does that make a difference?
It does. It does. And so just some ground rules for people who are coming in, because we have Poita joining us here. But Ryan and I are going to be having this conversation for a while. So if you have any questions, put them in the chat. We'll get to those when we can. And then at the end, so right around the bottom of the hour, we're going to be ending our conversation and opening up for Q&A. So, all right. So back to your question, Ryan. What was that?
Does it make a difference between golf and tennis, as watching a golf ball is stationary and watching a tennis ball is on the move? A bit more
Yes, and
dynamic.
that's what made me skeptical that the pure and the cross-dextral strategies would work for tennis because of the non-stationary tennis ball. But the way it works is that in putting, then the pure dextral golfer, looks at a place halfway between their putter and the hole.
Yeah.
And the cross dextral may look at the hole, but then they're going to focus on their contact point as they're putting. So then that then became something that I experimented with in doing clinics with my own players and with strangers, which was, like walking the tightrope without a net. And when it was successful, then I realized, okay, this is something that needs to be shared with people.
So how do people work out whether they're cross or pure?
Well, see, we have to go back to the dominant eye. So I think it's actually better if we talk about eye dominance first.
Yeah.
And start there, and before we get too deeply into the pure and cross, because I think for whatever reason people get confused when it comes to pure and cross. All right, so you can discover your eye dominance very simply by making a tiny hole in, right? You might even be able to see my eye through. Yeah, I think you probably can, right?
Yeah.
So you can make a tiny hole. You make a tiny hole with your hands, and then you sight a small object in the distance with both eyes open. And what's interesting here is I have both eyes open, and you can see that I'm left eye dominant, right? Because that was my left eye seeing. So, and then if you need to, you can close your eyes to make sure that you're absolutely sure which one doesn't see. I mean, so now the reason that's important is because your dominant eye does 80% of your seeing, of collecting data. And there seems to be it's important to intentionally use your dominant eye to see the ball. So, as when I started using this as a player, I went out of my way to go, okay, big point, make sure, okay, sight this ball with your left eye, as part of a pre-match ritual, especially if I had like made a loose error or whatever, I would stop and kind of collect myself and say, okay, did I not use my dominant eye on that ball? And, a lot of times that's the problem. So now the other interesting thing is that your non-dominant eye tracks with your dominant eye. So your dominant eye is like the lead dog in the pack, and then the other eye follows along. One thing that is a really interesting thing that people in multiple ball sports are doing is they're now doing visual occlusion exercises. So I'm actually about to start buying some eye patches.
Oh, really?
So there's research that shows that if you put an eye patch over your non-dominant eye and really give your dominant eye a workout, that's a good thing. Let it learn to appreciate the non-dominant eye, and then vice versa, put it over your dominant eye to make your non-dominant eye work harder. So there's a kind of a strengthening and then a greater facilitation of communication between the two that happens.
So would that be like, I'm right-handed, I think by habit, but when I picked up playing tennis left-handed, it seemed to be a more natural step for the refined muscle strength. And when I teach my players how to play backhand or two-handed backhand, I often use a left hand dominant for the right-handers, and we'll just play left-handed only, and it actually improves their forehand at the same time on the right side. And so can you change what hand you're more dominant at? And I guess it goes the same with the eye. Can you train your other eye to be more dominant? Or can you take turns?
I don't know that I would advise it, but it does seem to make sense that training your non-dominant eye will help you. I mean, it can be taught to do better. I mean, and then there are cases where someone becomes blind in their dominant eye, and then over a period of time, then your brain compensates to make the surviving eye the new dominant eye. I don't know enough about how well the brain does that. I can't, it's not something I can say, but I do know that phenomenon does exist, but I don't know to what degree it's an impediment in sports performance. But I've heard some, it's a fascinating thing, the hand dominance thing, because you have pure dextral, you have fine motor and gross motor skills. So some people, throw right, bat left, because the batting is more of a gross motor. Well, no, I think I have it backwards, because batting is actually more of a fine motor skill because you're receiving the ball, and throwing is a gross motor skill because you're sending the ball and you have to get more of your body into it. So it's an interesting thing how that works out. And there are a lot of confusing, idiosyncratic things that come with that whole mess. So I don't want to dig too deeply into that, because but I think we can really, you have the rest of your questions there?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Okay.
So do you use the same eye with cross or pure dextral on a forehand and a backhand, or can it swap?
See, that's a great question.
Different even when you're at a serve?
Now, I like the question a lot, because it kind of comes from a place of where I was originally when I started doing the research from the book. I wouldn't have known how to answer you, right? But clearly we have a dominant eye, and so you want that dominant eye to be looking forward. And so the big problem is your nose. Your dominant eye can't see past your nose that way, right? So, so here's my left eye. I can't see that way. So now, this partly explains why some people are better on one ground stroke than the other, and people who have fantastic backhands seemingly have such a pitiful forehand, and then their whole lives are based on, wow, if you only had a forehand, right? It seems like a tragedy, that this person has a great backhand, and it's like, well, if you only knew how to hit a forehand, you could be a great player. But and so strange, but eye dominance plays into that. So I had a horrible backhand, because I was trying to sight the ball with my non-dominant eye. And early on, I was taught to turn my head forward to see the ball incoming. This will tremendously help your volleys. So a lot of times people will have a weaker forehand or backhand volley because they turn their head too much to try to keep their eye on the ball. When instead, what you want is your dominant eye sighting that ball out of the frame and then going into your frame. So I'm going to say it's universally your dominant eye that wants to be looking forward to the ball. And then as the ball's approaching, you can have that little gentle head turn towards contact where your head will be relatively still. And then that kind of brings up the pure and the cross dextral again, because what we're seeing works for cross dextral people is to be a little bit more like Federer, where you're focusing on the ball from the bounce into the frame. And we're not arguing that you can see the ball go in and out of, you can't see the ball on the strings, period. It happens too fast. So don't misconstrue what I'm saying, but you can focus on the ball into the frame. This you can do. And then the pure dextral people, and here let me get my graphic up. I'll show this. So we've got right there, we've got Roger, right? And he's looking at his contact. And you mentioned this before, it's almost like he's looking through the back of the frame. So I think sometimes he does. Sometimes he's taking the ball so far out in front that he's seeing the ball through the back of the strings. But then look at Serena. Yeah, go ahead.
You have on those Federer pictures there, the top one's with his left eye and the other two with his right eye. Is that what it's showing?
Oh, the drawings are accidental. The drawings are the best I could do. So
okay.
The drawings indicate general eye direction, because there's only so much you can do with an Apple Pencil on an iPad.
Okay.
No, I'm glad you said that, because that could be misconstrued. So don't read too much into the yellow lines. Except that
I would think from the bottom.
Yeah.
From the bottom picture, I'd think that he's more right eye dominant, because his left eye looks a little lazy.
Maybe he's tired. No, I don't want to argue about that. I don't agree that that's a good supposition necessarily. I don't think we want to dig too deeply into it. But now look at Serena, and she's clearly looking ahead of contact. Well ahead of contact in some cases. So her eyes are tracking the ball at the end, I believe. And she's got her focal point in a place between the bounce of the ball and where she will make contact. And I don't know if you got to look at that whole thread where I showed my picture of Andre Agassi, and then every opinion on the planet then proceeded forward. Did you see that one?
Yeah, I think I saw that one. Yeah.
No, and then I kept asking people, well, do you think he's pure dextral? And there was zero questions about what does that mean. No one said, what does it mean to be pure cross dextral? And I just kept putting it up there. Well, I mean, but I think it's interesting, because we have to get past that. We have to stop wanting to always look like experts, because the only way to learn something is to disagree with something you formerly believed.
Well, I give it a chance to disagree at least. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you have to, in order to grow and change, you have to go and do something different than what you were doing before. What the definition of an insanity is, expecting different results by doing the same thing over. Okay, so I see a Poita comment. I'm going to assume Fed is right eye dominant, and I'm not so sure. I do believe Federer is left eye dominant, and he's cross dextral, and that's why he looks at the ball there. The so yeah, I think my pictures need some refinement. I will probably get some. I will use a better um, picture editing software app to draw straighter lines and draw the line from the left eye. So
the left eye dominant with Federer might explain why he tilts his head a bit more, you think?
yeah, because he's got to get his eye over to that place. And there's something about the cross dextral that that allows or requires you to focus on the ball all the way into the strings, whereas the pure dextral can sort of track it across their peripheral at the very end. So, um, yeah, I wish I understood that, but I don't. So,
Yeah, I'm still of the belief that Federer actually watches the racket into the ball rather than the ball come to the racket. And he seems to have a hitting point a bit further out than Serena Williams, even though his eyes are watching closer to the body than Serena Williams. What's your thoughts?
chicken and the egg. I mean, where did that egg come from? I mean, where how could you possibly get an egg without a chicken? So, right? I mean,
Yeah.
why? Right? Egg. What? Okay, chicken or the egg? Which came first? So, I don't know. It's not an argument that adds anything. So I think it's fine for you to look at it that way. And I don't want to argue about it because I mean, he can look at the racket going to the ball, or he can look at the ball going to the racket because ultimately they go elsewhere, right? And then Poita also has a really nice comment here. I've heard he tilts his head like that as a counterbalance for stability, and that's another interesting thing because balance and vision are also inextricably linked.
Yeah.
So, one of the top vision experts in the world, if not maybe the preeminent vision expert, Dr. Cheryl Calder, um, she is a proponent of every athlete cross training in many different ways. She wants to see children climbing trees, walking on narrow ledges of bricks, um, doing every kind of little crawling around thing you can possibly do, because then this whole lexicon of visual experiences and balance and overcoming different kinds of difficulty gives a wide range of skills. She's an interesting story because she grew up in South Africa when they were banned from all international sports. So, in the relative vacuum of having no one to play against, she became a world class field hockey player with no competition around.
Wow.
So, she taught herself how to play field hockey. And then, when she entered international competition, seasoned veteran world class field hockey players would stop her and say, "How do you do that?" And so that was like the birth of her understanding that she had a special gift because she spent so much time by herself practicing so many little moves and different ways to like hit the ball off of a wall, or hit it off a tree trunk, or you know you know playing on an incredibly uneven field, or whatever it was, gave her this advantage. So those of you out there who have very poorly kept courts and you have cracks on them and bad bounces and all that, you can tell your people this is an advantage, because if you can learn to play really well on a very uneven surface, you will have a huge advantage when the surface is playing very true. And
That's an additional advantage to actually playing on the surface against someone who doesn't know the surface.
yes, absolutely. So there's a huge advantage to be had there. I was disappointed when Wimbledon decided to homogenize the grass surface and make it play slower and, you know, ball bouncing higher, because the slick courts and the nerviness of serve and volley all the time and first one to blink. I loved Wimbledon when it was almost all tiebreakers. If you got broken, that set's over.
Yeah.
No,
I think
so
Nadal can be thankful for that, though.
Break point just had this major tension to it because you get broken, it's over. And so it's too bad that the tours have done that they've asked for this homogenization. But
how does cross or pure dextral affect playing a match? Maybe if I rephrase, like if you didn't know what you were and you're just kind of doing whatever happened, then you train to work on, I guess, the better method, how would it affect your match?
Okay, good. So now I understand the question better. So the number one negative impact is from not knowing your strategy or not implementing it properly, is that you're going to have a greater amount of mishits. Lenny Schloss of Billie Jean King's iCoach came up with this stat that 4 out of 5 mishits are a result of poor vision of the ball. So that's a tremendous amount of influence that you can have in a match when you can reduce the amount of mishits. And this is where I do believe one of the barriers of entry to the game to become a legitimate match playing tennis player is that we don't teach the visual skills well. And then also the other barrier is that people learn skills that are satisfactory and they get through to a certain level. In the US, it would be they could get to a 4.0 level. I'm not sure what that is in UTR these days, but there seems to be this barrier where as soon as the ball begins to travel a little faster and the spins are a little more widely varied, then they're lacking the visual skills that they need to be able to succeed at the higher levels. So I'm seeing another comment from Poita. Tennis is particularly difficult to achieve higher levels unless players start young, around 6 or 7, given the windows for learning. Yeah, I agree with that, but not completely that you have to. I think early exposure is great, but it doesn't mean that you have to play every day. I love these. I saw this great video of a 5-year-old boy, and he was on a tennis court that was overcrowded, and he was screwing around. He was doing downs and ups and flip flops and just all the little ball control exercises, and he was looked a little hyperactive. And most coaches would look at that and say, "Oh, this kid's going nowhere. This practice is disorganized. He's not learning anything." And it was Roger Federer.
Wow.
So, I mean, and it goes back to Cheryl Calder's point that it doesn't have to be this big structured thing early on. Being on a tennis court and having a tennis ball and a racket and doing whatever gives you visual experience. Okay, picking up the game late. Yeah, this isn't part of, these aren't on topic right now. I don't want to get into the whole big discussion about when do you have to start playing tennis. But it is true that earlier experiences are helpful. And there's a pretty wide range of how much you have to play. And one of the other big factors is how athletic are you? So if you've played some tennis and you're just an amazing athlete, then it's really not that hard to pick it up.
Like I played baseball and a lot of hockey, and I developed really good athletic skills, but I picked up tennis late. And so I never developed the tracking, the eye skills for a tennis ball bounces with ground strokes and returning serve. And unless you learn how to read those bounces, I think at an early age, you're forever handicapped. You can't, I have never seen
Yeah,
anybody.
I got to cut you off right there, Poita, because I vehemently disagree with that. And so you're making my point though for me is that what needs to be taught are the skills, are the visual skills. So what you're talking about to me is a failure of teaching pros to properly teach people at any age to get them introduced, because I guarantee you that 100% minus one, I don't know. I mean, 100% of the people who come to me for their first lesson and I teach them visual skills, and it doesn't matter their level, they could be a beginner, they could be a 4.5 or 5.0 level player here in the States, and I teach them one simple thing. Okay, your pure dextral do this, and it's like a light went off, and now all of a sudden they're hitting the ball a ton, and fewer mishits and all that. So I think it really comes back to teaching the best stuff. So Ryan, do you have any more questions that we need to cover before we wrap up?
No, but I'd just like to say that if you learn a skill early, you could probably master it and get a bit more refined over time. But if you to pick it up late, you can still pick it up and learn to do it quite well, because that's what practice is for, and that's why I think Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic are so good, because they just keep learning more skills and adding to their game, especially because they got each other to push them.
Right. Now, I mean, I will agree to the point that there's probably a cutoff at some point as you're getting closer to adulthood where, you're just not going to be able to pick a 140-mile-an-hour serve. Okay. I mean, if you don't start, if you're not really actively getting into the game, starting to play at a really high level around 14, 15, then the brain just doesn't have the experience that it needs. Here's an interesting example from the book. There was a man who had lost his sight at the age of 4, and he had stem cell treatment on his eyes, and every functional part of his eye worked. They tested every segment of his eye mechanics, all the circuitry, everything, right? And it all worked, healthy. So he leaves the hospital, and on the car ride home, every time he went under a car sign, he would duck. Years later, he still could not recognize his children. He had to touch their faces in order to know who they were. He couldn't tell the difference in low light whether that was a tree or a person over there. So there were all these remnants of things that he didn't have the visual experience in his brain for him to be able to process. And this went on for many years, and there's no real hope that he's going to do that. So that points to, yes, there does need to be this cumulative experience, but I think a generalized sporting experience with ball sports does quite well. So,
yeah.
All right. Any other final questions before we wrap this up? We're going to be done in like 4 minutes or less. All right.
What about with your serve?
Serving. Okay, as the server, one thing that's really fascinating about serving is that it's very target oriented. The placement of your serve is vital. And yet, your eyes ought to be up with contact. And so now the target is in your imagination. So you're hitting to a place in your imagination. I think one thing you can practically do as a player or with your players is have them look up at the place they would hit and point to the would-be target, because that builds that awareness of, I'm here and I want that ball to go there. And here's another 80% rule. 80% of your vision is in your brain, and about anywhere from 20 to 30% of it is coming through your eyes right now. So right now, Ryan could reach back and touch something that he cannot currently see because he knows where it is because it's in his brain. He's got that brown piece of furniture behind him. And you could create a mental image from that.
Yeah.
Might not be 100% accurate, but so your visual experience is stored in your brain. And then the new information comes in through your eyes. So this is where going up a level in play becomes a cognitive dissonance. It's a new experience. Now everybody's hitting the ball 5 miles an hour faster all the time. Now I have to run farther and engage higher levels of anxiety as I'm playing, and also calmly hit the ball, right? And that, because I mean, the feeling when you are on the court and you're completely overmatched, that shows you what you need to grow into. So it's a pretty major mistake when people push children into playing up all the time because they never learn to cope. It's always an overwhelming experience. And what they really need to do is learn to be successful at a certain level. I mean, every once in a while you can go to the waters of a higher thing. It's been a lovely time, guys. Yes, I got to get on with my life. I know you do too.
Yeah, so, thanks, Bill.
Thanks for your questions, Poita.
Yeah, no worries.
Thanks for joining us today, Bill, and looking forward to learning more about visual training and learning how to train how to use your dominant eye.
All right. No, thank you, Ryan. Thanks for conducting the interview, and thank you, Poita, for coming on with your comments.